right, here we go. So, setting the stage video is about 10-13 minutes, but it's well worth the 13 minutes. And after this, we can talk a little bit about it, and then we jump into the A to Z solutions.
Human history, we have to go back a long, long time. Turns out our ancient ancestors started walking this planet about 6 million years ago. And during all that time, early humans and our ancestors started to affect the environment. But they did it very locally, just right around where they lived. But something really changed in the last century, especially the last 50 years or so. We began to change the entire planet, all at once, in several different ways. Well, one of the things that happened, of course, is there are a lot more people on the planet. We're now over 7.5 billion people walking the Earth today and climbing. We also, for the first time in history, became an urban species. Over half the people on Earth now live in a city. That's never happened before. We also formed a global economy that is powered by technology and international trade, and as we did back in 1970. In the last 50 years, we have changed more than the previous 6 million years. In a way, it's kind of an inflection point. It's when everything's changing. Even the way we're changing is changing right now. And unfortunately, this change in us is also changing the planet in ways that are incredibly disruptive. Some of these changes you can see by just looking out the window. They're obvious. They're really right in front of you. For example, when we cut down a forest, we go in with chainsaws and bulldozers and set things on fire. You obviously can see that. And we're doing a lot of it. If we look at the Earth from outer space, we can see forests with a satellite. Here's a picture of a pretty remote part of the Amazon in Bolivia in the 1970s. And if you look carefully, there's a little dirt road running right through the middle of that forest. The very first clearings, just starting in 1975. But if we go back here about 25 years later, the whole area has been radically transformed into soybean fields. And the soybeans are being shipped all the way to China to be used as animal feed. So a global economy connecting the Amazon to Chinese pigs is clearing rainforest in a remote part of the world. And this is happening everywhere. In fact, we're seeing so far about 30% of all the tropical forests on Earth have been lost, and a lot of that in the last few decades. We also see how agriculture, just farming, is changing the world. We usually think of farming on a small scale, like an individual farmer's field. We can walk through it, we can pull up a carrot, we can look at the cows and all this kind of thing. But agriculture is now a global force. Again, if we look at it from satellite, the Earth is covered in agriculture. This map shows in green the areas where we grow our crops. That includes the plants we eat, of course, but also the plants we feed to animals, and some we feed to cars in the form of biofuels. The brown areas are where we actually raise the remaining animals, our pastures and rangelands. And if you put it all together, agriculture now covers over a third, between 35 and 40%, of all the land on the planet. It is now the largest ecosystem on Earth, and that's incredible. So we've changed forests, we've changed the world through agriculture, and we're also changing the nature of water across the planet. We're a pretty thirsty species. We use a lot of water on this planet for our homes, to drink, and we use water in industry, and we use most of our water, though, in agriculture. About 70% of the water we take out of nature is used for just one thing, irrigation. Let me show you how that can affect the world, though. Here's a picture of the Aral Sea from the late 1960s. This is a satellite picture showing one of the world's largest inland bodies of water in the middle of Central Asia, in Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan. But the Soviet Union in the 60s and 70s diverted the rivers that would feed the Aral Sea. Instead, they sent that water over into the deserts of Kazakhstan to grow cotton in the middle of the desert. And this is what happened. It shut off the water supply of one of the world's great inland seas, and it disappeared. And this is not just unique to Central Asia. This kind of overuse of water resources is happening in California. It's happening in the Midwest and Great Plains and our Ogallala Aquifer. It happens in North Africa. It happens in Australia. It happens in China and everywhere. In fact, our thirst for water has massively disrupted water resources and ecosystems across the globe. So these changes we've seen in forest and land and water. They're just plain as day. We can see them, we can photograph them, they're right in front of us. But some other changes happening to the planet were initially a little bit more subtle, especially changes to our atmosphere and to the climate of our planet. This story actually begins more or less in the 1800s. Starting back then, we began activities, especially the burning of fossil fuels and the explosion of agriculture, that started to change the nature of our atmosphere. For example, we saw that CO2 levels, one of the major so-called greenhouse gases, started to increase from the 1800s till about now. And it's so far increased by about 50%. And today, greenhouse gas levels are higher than they've been for 3 to 5 million years. We've never seen something like this in any time in human existence. And later I'll talk about this, how greenhouse gases going up causes the temperature of the planet to go up. And while the greenhouse gases like CO2 have risen, so have the temperatures of our planet. In fact, the temperature of our planet is warmed by about 1 degree Celsius already. Initially, that was a little subtle. Maybe it's a half a degree or 0.6 of a degree and so on. And we could argue whether this was happening or not. But today, it is plain as day that we have changed the temperature of our planet, and it's getting warmer faster all the time. We're seeing the effects of a warmer planet almost everywhere we look. One of the early signs was looking at our glaciers. Here in Alaska, we have the Muir Glacier, which now has to be relabeled Muir Lake. We also see in South America, the other side of the world, how glaciers in Patagonia in South America are melting, forming large lakes as well. Perhaps most disturbingly, those changes to an entire ocean. We're seeing how the Arctic Ocean, which is usually covered in sea ice year-round, has been melting year by year by year. Here in the 1980s, we see when sea ice is at its kind of minimum in late summer, early fall. But by the early 2010s, we see a massive reduction in sea ice, which continues to this day. And soon, maybe within a decade or so, we'll have the first ice-free Arctic months in all of recent geologic time. And we're seeing a planet radically transformed by our actions. And again, this all became possible in the last 50 years or so. Scientists often call this period of time the Great Acceleration, when everything started to take off. We see population change, urbanization, globalization, and then we started clearing ecosystems like forests, and we built up more and more farms around the world. We started building huge dams and using more and more water than ever before. We also use more fertilizers and more chemicals, especially in agriculture and industry, and those change the nature of water, even at the scale of our oceans. And then, of course, we're farming the oceans. We're harvesting more fish than ever and doing what we call aquaculture, or fish farms, at a scale unlike anything we've ever seen. But the really scary big thing that's happening, of course, is climate change. Our use of energy, our clearing of land, and a few other things have changed the nature of the entire atmosphere forever. And those changes are going to make the planet warmer. And if we keep going, it's going to be a massive disruption to everything on the planet. Not just the thermometers, not just the polar bears, but us. In fact, climate change has the potential to hurt the most vulnerable people among us. People living right on the edge of poverty or food security or having fresh water or good, safe places to live. Climate change is going to put a huge burden on future generations. People who didn't emit anything, they're not even born yet. And yet we could be leaving a giant mess on their doorstep that could last for centuries or thousands of years. Now, I wouldn't blame you one bit if you took all of this information in and said, this looks really grim, and maybe it's even hopeless. I'm going to stop you right there, because it's not true. It is not hopeless at all. In fact, there are a lot of things that are getting better. At the same time, the environmental situation is getting worse. Let me remind you of a few of these. During the last 50 years, for example, humans have gotten healthier. We used to live to be about 55 years on average on this planet, just back in the 1970s. Today, the average person on Earth can be expecting to live to be over 70, 71. That's amazing. We also see that women have many fewer children. 50 years ago, the average woman on Earth had over 5 children, on average. Today it's 2.4 and falling faster than anybody ever predicted. And those children are healthier, with stronger families, and women have more opportunities than they've had before. We also see the world is far more literate than it's ever been. Today, 86% of the world's population can read and write. Back in 1970, that was only 50%. And back in 1900, it was only 15%. And at that point is the highest in all of history. We are healthier, we have more rights, and we're more educated and literate than anybody who's ever lived before. We're also more urban, we're more mobile, we're more connected and less violent than any people who've ever walked before us. So this is an interesting paradox, isn't it? Some things are getting better, some things are really getting worse. A lot of people come up to me and ask, like, well, so what's the future gonna be? Is it gonna be a total disaster, kind of like a Mad Max movie, some dystopian science fiction disaster film? Or is it gonna be awesome? Is it gonna be like a Star Trek movie where we pull ourselves out of this mess and build an incredible future and seize this amazing opportunity we have to become better? Which one's it gonna be? Well, the answer is, it's up to you. It's up to us. It's up to everybody. We get to build the future we want. It hasn't happened yet. We don't know what tomorrow is going to be because we haven't built tomorrow yet. The future is ours to choose, so we have to choose a good one. And we can choose a world if we want to. If we really put our minds to it, we still have the ability to build a future where people and nature can thrive, today and tomorrow. But to get there, we're going to have to do the hardest thing of all. We're going to have to step back as a people and make our choice, to make the choice of a generation, of this moment in history. We have to choose between the people we are or the people we can be. The people like some of our ancestors who gave everything so that we could live better lives. We are capable of so much, and yet we've realized so little. What do we choose? And we can choose the world that is. That's a giant mess right now in a lot of ways. Or we could choose the world that could be, an incredible world full of potential when we seize all of our creativity and energy to build the world that we want. So which one are you going to choose? Which one are we all going to choose? The future of the world and everyone who will live after us will depend on that decision.
Any comments, questions? Pretty powerful, a little bit depressing, but also kind of what the problem is, but it also tries to be positive. So that is the whole premise of this organization, basically. And what I want to do is I want to give you some tools to make good choices or convince other people to make good choices. So they have the A to Z solutions. When you click on this, they put them in this nice format. I created one slide that shows an example. So for example, if you happen to have drawn the letter B, then you go to this list of solutions. And I just, as an example, put Finance Power. So if you click on it, all the solutions have like a small paragraph on the right-hand side, and you can divvy it up. Let's say you say one of you reads the first two paragraphs and the other person reads the second two paragraphs, and then you just put them into 3 to 4 bullet points. That's it. Just summarize. I don't expect you to be experts on it. You're just going to say, okay, biomass, for example, is only a bridge solution because it's not perfect because unless you grow as much as you burn to generate energy, it's not really a real solution, but it can help in the meanwhile until we get to 100% renewable energy. And it only works if you truly use agricultural waste, so you don't take just any forest and burn it down to produce energy. 100% renewable energy, then it's great. So you claim your slide of your letter, and while you work on this, I'm going to delete the slides that nobody is going to claim, because obviously there's more letters in the alphabet than people in this room. And I will give you 10 minutes to work on it, and then we quickly go around the room and we're going to talk about the solutions. All right? Go for it.
familiar with net zero buildings? Yeah. They're basically just like carbon.
Have to spend like much heating on, or is it about?
Why don't we just turn the V into a W?
It's like
Oh.
carbon neutral, sort of like they only have like clean energy like solutions like solar panels or like wind power.
Nobody has
We don't have to do that.
Nobody has
if you don't want to do it.
No, we
That's
can
just
do
what I'm mostly familiar with. Okay.
We could do like,
Temperate forest is.
Oh, there's like our money for this.
Nobody has it. Yeah.
It's some reason, maybe they.
Yeah. Which
Oh,
letter did you? Oh, it didn't load?
Yeah, it didn't.
Oh, oh, oh.
I guess it's not that.
Which letter do you guys have? Oh,
I
R.
can just put in the.
Oh, R, that's right. Wait, actually you can pick, so you were the ones that were, it's working what happens? You got to the website and all stuff?
so these two,
Yeah.
To the A to Z?
Yeah, how about
Did you get to the?
Let's do one first paragraph.
Good. And
Oh, yeah. Doesn't give a precise figure for, but it's like how much to do like 2 years.
Well, generally, it's like however much energy the building will be using. That's like, because like each building uses a different amount of consumption, but like, normally like CO2.
what letter did you guys have?
Net zero.
It's not like the building itself necessarily, it's just like,
Yeah, but I mean, in terms of construction costs.
Did you find anything?
Actually,
What did you find?
significant
well, if we
difference.
look at like there are multiple ways to prove that was, if like a building included all of that, I'm assuming it would probably cost more because like electro.
Should we like reduce the font
glass,
size a little bit, do you think?
is not regular glass, it's like special glass, it's supposed to like
No, I don't think
conserve, because even though it might like cost more to like, to just make it first, it should like be self-sufficient, and just like pay for itself, because then, yeah. So I think that's what like all these,
Make each separate thing used in individual net zero building and calculate that.
yeah, but like it does depend on each building that's like used.
Doesn't have to be super perfect. I'm not expecting you to know everything about that solution. Just about. Oh,
I think.
P. Who had public
Wait, I think
transportation?
you have
I
to
think,
exit the slide
Oh,
and get back.
I have to refresh it.
Yeah.
Okay. Good point.
so net zero buildings are basically carbon neutral buildings where they like are self-sufficient and they like don't emit carbon or use up like carbon resources. They like create their own electricity and they're like really efficient with how they like use their electricity.
Yeah, and so the way they do that usually includes things like instead of electric lights, just using windows for daylight, insulation to prevent having to use excess energy to heat the house,
Oh, that was the time.
electrochromic glass, which is basically just glass designed to keep energy in the house basically.
Uh-huh.
Passive solar design, which is solar without like intrusively, like, you know, some methods of passive solar design are like, one thing is like putting solar nodes in like glass to
Yeah.
harvest energy through the glass.
Yeah.
As well as just efficiency in all your heating, cooling needs.
Yes. If you had to categorize this, is this something private people do or industry? Or both?
It's both.
Yeah. I would say too. Ideally, that would be if everybody would live in a net zero house, oh my God, I mean, that would be huge. But in your opinion, how close are we to getting this?
I think that we're really far because it's really expensive to like have a net zero building at first. I feel like it's kind of like electric cars where it's like really expensive to buy at first, but then over time it just
Yes.
becomes cheaper.
Yep,
So like right now, I feel like it's really expensive and like not many people can do it.
yep, I agree. I mean, I wish, but I think, like even insulation, if you think about the houses you guys live in, I mean, I know my house is horrible in insulation. We heat and cool the outside more than our inside, so I feel that there is a lot of room for improvement, generally speaking, but for sure, it would save so much energy and costs. Right, anybody else want to comment on it? All right, P, public transportation, one of my favorites. Who had P? Yeah.
So like public transit is like when you use like, instead of using your own car to get around, you use like something that the public can use, so more people would be on it, which would reduce traffic and help save lives because there would be fewer accidents because the road is less congested.
Yep.
And since there are fewer cars on the road, you would also have a lower carbon footprint, so it would reduce air pollution. And by doing this, by 2050, we can save up to 23 gigatons
Yeah.
of energy by using public transit.
Yep.
And there's this thing called rapid bus transport, which is one of the methods they're using for this thing, which it costs significantly less money than other types of public transportation, and it's also like rapid, so it's a good thing to use.
Yeah. Is this private or in the industry? Well, it's maybe more private. Like, I mean, it comes from the industry, but it's private people who should be encouraged to use more public transportation. Yes. Public. And what's the biggest thing that's holding us back from using? Does anybody of you guys use public transportation on a regular basis? Kind of. Yeah.
Yeah, my family lives in the city, so I'll use like the train.
Yeah, like subway?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's one thing. I mean, we live on the Cape, it's pretty remote, we don't really have a subway system. But people who live in a city, I feel like they really shouldn't have a car. Why? Unless, I mean, maybe have a car, but do most of your stuff with public transportation or bike, and have the car for, day trips if you want to go somewhere else.
And then in Falmouth, there's the bus from Woods Hole to
Yes.
which is useful.
Yes.
Since I live in Woods Hole.
Yeah, if you guys live in Woods Hole, you're actually really lucky. A, you have a bike path, and B, you actually have a really decent public transportation.
It's been a lot worse since COVID, though. They don't run as often, so
Yeah.
you could be like at the farmer stop for an hour waiting for bus.
Yep. And also on the Cape, I know that in the summer, all students get a free ticket to the buses, right? To the public transportation buses on the Cape. Has any of you guys ever heard about it? I'm almost 100% sure in the summer, kids on the Cape get a free ride on public buses, which is great. I mean, it's encouraging. And then, of course, what goes hand in hand with this, if there's more buses, there should be electric buses, right? I mean, ideally, if we put more buses on the road, they should be carbon neutral and probably electric. But we're getting there. I think that it's in the process. Ooh, interesting. Reduced food waste. Who had, you guys? Yeah, talk about it.
So food waste, it's just like food that's not eaten or not used. So it makes up 8% of the global greenhouse gas emissions.
Yeah.
Fact was that higher income countries produce more food waste because they throw away like small food for small reasons.
Yeah.
Bumps, bruises, discoloration. And the lower income countries, they had significantly less food waste because they would throw it away because those small things it showed that it was usually earlier in the process, like before it got to their houses or
Yeah.
whatever it is. Want to say anything or should I?
Yeah, 8% of global emissions, that's actually really a big number. The most stuff that ends up in our garbage is food waste. And it's actually a pretty big problem. Did you want to add to that?
And it's a really big waste of our local resources such as
Yeah.
water and seeds as well,
Yeah,
and many other things. And
yeah,
throughout the whole growing process of the food, it can also produce emissions. It
Yeah.
produces throughout every single process.
yeah.
So it's really a waste if you throw away something that you could have been eating and you have to grow more to replace it.
Yeah. So where would that be, private or industry, or both?
I think that is both.
I agree, because I mean this also goes to restaurants or any of those places, right? So reduce food waste. And why is this so hard, if, in your opinion? I mean, we're probably all guilty of this. We all, at some point or another, have thrown out food. But why is it so hard to not throw out food? Or have you heard about things that people have initiated and are doing to eliminate more of this? Yeah.
That'd be compost bins.
Yes. Composting for sure. So good. Yep. Yeah, Deborah.
I've heard of places that, maybe not places, but like people who use their food waste to create another dish.
Yeah.
So it's like recycling.
Yeah. Yeah, Matthew.
I saw something that was just taking like stores, like food that people didn't buy and was just like giving it to animals, like pigs.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. 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 Why not? And sometimes to food shelters, like supermarkets that have fruits and vegetables that nobody wants to buy because they don't look good. They hand them to like places that will still use them, or food pantries. And recently, I want to say, I saw it on TV, honestly, as an advertisement, that restaurants give out, you can order too good to throw out, and whatever they have left over in restaurants, you can purchase for a reduced price. Has anybody seen that? I want to say, I've been following the basketball, the March Madness, and it's really interesting. Big problem, for sure, because it's hard. We've all thrown out food, and we should be better managing that, but all right, silo pasture? What? Yeah.
So basically, this is like raising livestock through integration of pastures and forests. So basically,
Yeah.
just like raising cows like in a forest. And there's a lot of benefits to this. So from fertilization from the cows, you get improved plant nutrition in the forest, and you also get increased wildlife diversity and water quality.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, it decreases the carbon output like a normal pasture would, and then it's lower prices for farmers. And then the forage products protects the soil from water and wind erosion, so that adds organic matter to improve soil properties.
Yeah, so good. Why aren't farmers doing this integrated? So from the introduction movie, that rang a bell with me when they said agriculture is actually such a big business because we need to feed the global population, but our practices and how we do agriculture are so bad. If we would do more of integrating and having trees in the pastures, not just grass. Yeah, so private or industry? Kind of industry probably.
Yeah.
I mean, private, maybe a small private farm if you're a farmer, but it would probably be a good solution for, I have my timer. And it's called salvo pasture? That's such a strange name. All right, let's see. We have a few more. Temperate forest restoration. T. Oh, you guys.
So over 99% of the world's temperate forests have been altered for industry or building in those areas. But restoring temperate forests will retain extra carbon in the added biomass.
And so the world has 1.9 billion acres of temperate forests, and they act as a net carbon sink, obviously, because trees have like an opposite carbon cycle than humans.
And there's 1.4 billion acres that are either damaged forests or places where forests once were and like could be restored, that are like candidates to be restored into new forests, and each one restored is obviously more carbon sequestered from the air.
Yep, so this is actually a biggie. The organization Project Drawdown published another book on regeneration of forest and land that is not used or has been used up for agriculture. So they have a whole new book on it that it would completely help with drawing down carbon out of the atmosphere if we would just restore land. So industry or private?
I think that's industry.
Yeah, I mean, that's a big scale sort of endeavor. Tell me. Forest.
And this is like also personally relevant because we live in a temperate area.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, it would. The quality of life would completely improve if we would do it. And you, who has utility scale energy storage? Yeah.
Utility storage pumps water from lower reservoirs into higher ones, and then the water that was transferred from the lower ones into the higher ones, is released back down, and it runs through power generating turbines.
Oh.
Yeah, and then molten salt is used to hold heat until it is needed to go generate electricity.
Oh, right. So this is a form of generating energy in a renewable way?
Yeah, there's a lot of big words.
Oh, right. So private or industry?
Industry.
Yeah, or could this be done privately? Not really. Utility scale energy storage. Alright, is there walkable cities? Yes.
Walkable cities is pretty self-explanatory. And what we found was you could just use planning, design, and density to maximize walking and also minimize driving.
Yeah.
And basically manageable distance is like making it manageable for you to walk places. Like obviously here you can't really walk places because it's like not a city, but if you really, walk up to everywhere.
And then so walk feels like wider, well-lit, tree-lined sidewalks and walkways, so you would be able to see cars coming in. It would be more friendly for walking.
Yep.
And safe and direct pedestrian crossings, again for cars and stuff. So you can see them.
Yeah, I love it. Falmouth is pretty walkable, so we're pretty lucky in a small town. We can walk a lot, I guess. But most cities in the United States are not very walkable, I think. There's not a lot of sidewalks. Industry of private or both?
I think it would be both.
Yeah, sort of, because people should be using it, but the government should offer it and put money into it, sort of.
It's like they should design cities to be walkable instead of drivable.
And then people use them.
And that also goes probably hand in hand, walkable and bicycle friendly cities.
Right.
All right, so this is great. What's the time? Perfect. So you got a few ideas from the A to Z, and obviously there's more solutions. And the mission of Project Drawdown is to help reach drawdown, which means the point in the future when levels of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere stop climbing and start to steadily decline, thereby stopping catastrophic climate change as quickly, safely, and equitable as possible. Now, so the reason I put it in the private industry and kind of in the middle is because often I feel that climate change can be so overwhelming that we don't really know where to start, and it feels often that it has to come from government or from big policies. So I found this video that explains 4 levels of action, which to me was sort of an eye-opener, because we're always told, well, I can make changes, I can compost, I can...
In terms of a lot of social change, and especially in relation to the environment, I think of what I call the 4 levels of action. The first is individual action. The second is action with my friends and family, the folks who I'm directly connected to. The third is community and local institutions. And the fourth is the economy and policy change and changing laws. And so, in the environment, level 1 is, yeah, I recycle, I use less, I drive less. Level 2 is I get me and my family to do that. And maybe I put solar panels on my roof. And maybe I join a community-supported agriculture, a CSA. Level 3 is when that's when I start to do things like change the way.
Of our workshop. Please make your way to the Simon Center for our Indigenous Cultural Performance. Thank you.
Alright, so, hold on 1 second. So, 4 levels of action is basically you as an individual, your family and friends, and then your community, your school, your town, and the 4th one is government. So, what we didn't get to, I thought we had until 3, but that's okay, is that I wanted you to make your own commitments on this little card that I'm handing out, and an overview to the Lazy Person's Guide to Saving the World, which talks about the different sort of levels. They just call it like changes I can do for my couch and so on. And I, full disclosure, I sort of, because I'm passionate about the topic, told myself, well, I have to make my own goals, so I challenged myself to not use any paper towels anymore. And I thought it would be impossible because I use so many paper towels every day. But for like a year